Good to see you again.
Great to see you, Diana.
Yeah. Um, we did a minute or half a minute really, of remembering why we're here before we got on. And my grandma popped up in my uh, mind. And it was my grandma, dang, she struggled with alcohol her whole life. And for the reason she came to me, what happened for you when you were in that half a minute of why we're here, who we're here for?
So, when I was finishing my book, I got really caught up in perfectionism and trying to get it over the finish line. And what I often try to do to connect to the purpose behind it was to think of just one person who could connect to something in the message or the story or the narrative or the lived experience of addiction. And that came to mind. Just
Mm,
who is an example of that one person who might need to hear something about addiction or about struggles with self-control.
yeah. Whoever that one person is, you're listening. They're listening. Um, so we have a shared similar history, although very different in terms of um, struggling with the very thing that we are researching. Tell us a little bit about you in residency while I mean, you have in the Urge, you have so many beautiful weavings of your story where there's this one image where you talk about touching your own liver while you're training someone else to palpate a liver to tell if it's, I don't know what happens to a liver, but you can like feel it if it gets too big or something,
Yep.
right? And
Yep.
you're touching your own and then you do your own test and it's not bad enough, or you kind of are disappointed that you kind of wish it were worse because maybe
Yeah.
that would make you stop.
Yep.
And you're in residency studying addiction.
That's right. Yeah. So I mean, my struggles with alcohol in particular started way before then, but I went to medical school and then residency at Columbia University in New York. And during that whole time, I had a sort of tortured experience with alcohol and then other drugs, uh, Adderall, and then cocaine. Um, and I was also pretty functional until I wasn't. I was really successful at living that double life and putting up a strong front throughout all 4 years of college and all 4 years of, well, really 5 years of med school because I took an extra year to do a research fellowship in brain research and had really significant, like a lot of people, and especially like a lot of people who are really focused on achievement or external validators of worth. Uh, I, the work was the last thing to go, and I had a lot of fractures in my personal life and a lot of impoverishment in my just like day to day life and losing hobbies and losing contact with what mattered to me. But then it was in residency where it all came crashing down. So I had, graduated with Columbia Med School with all these awards, and I thought I was an academic superstar. And then all of a sudden, I started getting into trouble, mouthing off to superiors, showing up late, and then went through. We can talk more about the push and pull of it. I went through periods where I tried to lock it down only by myself. I tried to impose like a self-directed, completely isolated program of like I'm gonna get better totally by myself without telling anybody else, so I can prove to myself that I'm okay and I can prove to myself that I don't have a problem. And then I did that, and it worked until it didn't. And then thankfully, I was on vacation when I went on a huge binge, and I wound up at the psychiatric emergency room in Bellevue Hospital because I'd taken so much Adderall and cocaine. I had put myself into a manic episode. I was fully out of touch with reality, and I was getting interviewed. It's kind of funny in retrospect, or at least that it's a bit like tragic that I had to get to that point. But I was interviewing with these people just a couple years prior to uh, interview at the NYU psychiatric residency program, and now these people are the attendings who are like seeing me as a patient in Bellevue Hospital, which is sort of like the most notorious psychiatric hospital in New York City. And so that was like my first real reckoning with addiction, and then the whole process of recovery started off from there.
So you were able to really kind of contain it. Maybe there was some fraying edges of, a few relationships or some things that are going awry, but for the most part, you were able to contain it while you were pursuing your academic achievements. You really, that was very precious to you, the academic
Yeah, yeah.
path. And then you're in Bellevue and these worlds collide. It's almost like two separate lives, they're seeing me here. This is real. I'm not well.
Yeah, they really did collide, the
Yeah.
worlds of professional and addiction and recovery. Because in my case, as a physician, and at that point in my training, I was licensed. I had a New York State medical license, and because of that, there were consequences. And I was lucky in the sense that one of the doctors there said there is this advocacy group that you can voluntarily report yourself to, and they will help you. Uh, and I did that. And then even just a few days later, so I picked up the phone, and it was in a disciplinary thing. It was really for the interest of like helping the doctors who were struggling with mental health issues, primarily substance use disorders. Uh, and I said, I need help. I think I'm an alcoholic. I'm finally coming to terms with how isolated and how bad this has been. And they said, okay, sure, sure, sure. We'll get you into treatment. Don't worry. We'll help you. We'll help you return safely to work. And then a couple days later, I called up my best friend from the payphone in the hallway of the Bellevue Psychiatric Ward. And I said, do you really think I have to stop drinking? Maybe I could just take some time off. Da, 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 da. So like immediately
Mm-hmm.
uh, I started experiencing this sort of like denial, or this like insidious. People think of denial sometimes as like this door that just slams shut. Like, no, I don't have a problem, and I certainly had that. But I also had the sort of more subtle kind of denial that was like sneaky, and came in later and said, oh, maybe there's an easier way, or maybe you don't really have to qualify as an alcoholic, or maybe there's a way for you to return to controlled drinking. And I'm really, really lucky that I had the hard choice of my license. If I didn't have a medical license and I didn't have all these programs and these external checks on my behavior, I truly don't know what I would have done. But because of that experience, I had to like sign a 5-year contract, get regular urine monitoring, have a worksite monitor at my residency program. At the time, it felt like my life was over, and I hated all these things. Um, but in retrospect, I'm really, really grateful for them, because I don't know what would have happened otherwise.
You talk about the distinction, sort of this dichotomy that we're often in with addiction, where on one end of the spectrum is the belief that you have a choice and control over it. And then the other end of the spectrum is that it's this sort of brain disease that people are, even in the first step of AA, like I'm powerless over alcohol. And in that example, you're kind of putting in the contingency management, the environmental control to
Mm-hmm.
help, right? But at the same time, there's more to it than just that, because some people would override. They would override their license. They would put their kid in the back of the car
Yep.
and drive with their kid in the back of the car while they're drunk. And it's not because they don't love their kid, right?
Yes.
So there's somewhere in the middle between all of that. Like it's you are out of control. Like you didn't really have much, it's not like there was a conscious choice in using. And then also at the same time, there was sort of a conscious choice there. Tell me about that.
Yeah, that's such a deep issue you're landing on, and it's in many ways it's the main focus of my next book, which I just started work on and won't come out for ages. So it's not even
Yeah,
like I'm
never.
plugging
It's
it.
not coming out. But tell us.
Yeah, it's called Can't Put It Down, and it's
Can't put it
about
down. So good.
exactly this middle ground. So I think that we have. Let me put it this way: I think we have two stereotypical, impoverished views of how choice and control operate. And
Mm-hmm.
one end of the spectrum says people's brains are hijacked, whether it's addiction or something else. Like your brain is hijacked, you're a victim. You're zombified. There's no possibility of doing otherwise. And there's a
You have a
lot of
disease.
evidence. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
disease. Yeah, that sometimes like kind of, disease is messy. I mean, like there's a lot of ideas that kind of get like shoved in with the label disease, but that's one of the things that gets associated with disease, is this notion of like complete and total lack of control. Compulsion's a big messy word. What does compulsion mean? It usually means zero control whatsoever, and that like flies in the face of most people's experience, certainly my experience as a person with addiction, many of the people that I work with or that I've talked to. People with addiction engage in lots of control, right? Like they plan, they make arrangements, can go through extensive effort to try to get what they need to get their drug of choice or their behavior of choice. There's concealment, like all that stuff speaks to the possibility of some kind of control. And then the other end of the spectrum says like it's nothing but a choice. Like, oh, it's a choice like any other choice. People are just choosing. If somebody is drinking heavily, it's just because they feel like in that moment it's the right thing for them, and everything else is social construction or just a nice story they're trying to say to get out of responsibility, which I think is pretty also inhuman. Like the compulsion view is dehumanizing because it says you're a zombie, you couldn't have done otherwise. The choice view is dehumanizing because it completely negates the lived experience of millions and millions of people who say, I really felt like I was out of control. So what is that out of control? If the out of control is not complete and total destruction of control, but it's like diminished control, um, then what is that? And I think, there are a lot of ways of understanding that. I think one of the things that ACT in particular has been helpful for me in my own psychotherapeutic work with clients and my own recovery is thinking in a process-based way. Like, what are the processes that are going on here? And it can be variable, it can be diverse, right? Like sometimes taking the case of addiction, sometimes people feel like it's really automatic. Like it's like a cue response thing, almost like Pavlov's dogs. I'm back in a circumstance and it triggers a response, and before I'm even aware of it, I'm reaching for a drink. That's something that people commonly experience, and maybe that's something like fusion. Uh, Whereas there are much more active versions of relapse that people experience where they're like plotting and planning. They know their partner's going to be out of town next week and they start fantasizing and ta. And that might be identity related. Uh, that might have something to do with losing contact with values. Who knows? But like breaking it down, all the diversity of ways that people can lose control, I think is very, very helpful for navigating those difficulties that people experience.
And in the newer sort of conceptualizations of ACT, we're starting to look at experiential avoidance and experiential attachment. So there's these two parts to addiction too, where there's the experiential avoidance part. I'm thinking about you and as a resident, of all the things that were painful probably about that academic experience of being a resident. I wasn't one, but I've been in academia and it's painful. I mean, there's the demand, the stress, the demands on you, the pressure to perform, the social pressures. So we're avoiding that feeling. And we certainly see with addictions, whatever your addiction is. I mean, I want to talk a little bit about that, of definitions of addiction and what, because that's changed over time, what we can become addicted to. So we're escaping something, but then there's also the attachment things. We're also chasing something. We're chasing a feeling. In the urge, you talk about that experience of that first drink, or even you talk about eating the maraschino cherries from your parents' drinks.
Yeah, that's right.
And that the sweet with a little bit of alcohol and how it just hit you in such a good spot, right? And I, for myself, I know that tendency. For me, I kind of feel like they hit me harder than other people. Like when I had my first drink, I don't drink, in part because I don't trust myself. It was so good. It was so good. And I have that tendency for anything that I could take it really far. So that attachment to the feeling state, or the attachment to, also we can get attached to identities or stories about who we are, and chase that too. So ACT has these beautiful ways of, I think, describing addiction that's non-pathologizing, that's just understanding the human condition, right? Because we could get we experientially avoid in lots of ways. We experientially attach in lots of ways, and maybe addiction is one form of that.
Right.
Um, d- d- let's just define. Let's do some definitions of addiction and what can we get addicted to. I mean, I can get addicted to carrots. My hands have turned orange. So I don't know if it's really the substance.
That's the opening vignette of my book proposal. So there's several case reports of people who report carrot addiction. Yeah, yeah, and there's been a lot of speculation about why that might be. A lot of people get hooked into it because of the notion that it's like a low calorie weight loss hack. But then
Yeah.
there are other. There's this really interesting case from Prague back when it was behind the Iron Curtain,
Uh-huh.
um, where this is like early days of the Soviet dominance and sort of like influence over Czechoslovakia, and there's like even in the middle of this massive recession, like Iron Curtain is down, people are like scrounging for vegetables in the markets, like in the town square. Even then, there's this case of one woman who is like hoarding her money just to be able to get enough carrots, and she's eating pounds and pounds a day, to the point where the irises, or the whites of her eyes, were stained orange. So like that's really interesting. There's always been I've noticed this thread of like uh the
So good.
carrot stuff.
We need a diagnostic category. Let's put a label on this, right? Because then,
Totally.
right? So 5 of 9 symptoms of carrot addiction.
Yeah, exactly.
Uh-huh.
You were asking about the definitions of addiction, and yeah, I think this is really important. It was personally useful to me as a person with a fundamental question, like what has happened to me. I had the intuitive sense, oh yeah, I guess I'm an alcoholic, and I had seen both of my parents who had struggled with alcoholism, and it made sense to me. But then upon examination, I was still faced with this question, like what actually happened to me, which is the whole point behind me looking at the history or the philosophy or anything else. And I found it really, really useful to think about the actual definition of addiction, because when it came about in the English language, it was before we even had a notion of modern medicine. People brought the word addiction into the English language a little bit before the time of Shakespeare in the 16th century, precisely to describe that middle ground where you feel out of control, but there's still an element of control. And so it was initially brought into the language by philosophers and religious leaders who were trying to describe the state where you willfully give up the will. Like through your own willful action, you lose the ability to control. As opposed to, and I don't like some of these modern definitions. There's one modern definition that's like continued use despite negative consequences. That doesn't make any sense to me. Because that's just like an objective description from the outside. There's a sort of value judgment implicit in it. Um, but there are plenty of people who meet criteria, especially for behavioral problems, where they're continually doing a thing which causes some kind of measurable consequence, but it doesn't have that personal experience of like, I feel out of control. Like I'm still a little bit in control. I'm still a little out of control. What is this about? I think that willful erosion of the will, willfully losing control of the will, is where the heart of it is for me and for a lot of people
So
with a
then would
personal
coffee
experience.
not the erosion of the will, something like coffee addiction. I mean, some of these like everyday addictions that we have and that we choose willfully. I mean, like I'm definitely addicted to coffee. When I go on, I'm about to go on retreat, and I'll go off it to be able to be in the retreat, and I will watch that the urge. It's very strong the first few days. I'm irritable. I want it. I crave it. I think about it. I have that like who cares? This doesn't matter. I should just. I mean, there was a part of me that wanted me to go off of this a week ago, but that part of me was stupid.
Mm,
And then I'll ride that, and then eventually we'll come back down. So then after a 7-day or a 5-day retreat, I won't want it anymore.
yeah. And then you'll
So
think,
but it's
why
not
would I ever
causing
take it again? And I'll never drink coffee again. And then you drink it
right.
again, right?
And then, well, yeah, and then I'll be out to breakfast with somebody, and I'll just have one cup, and then
Yeah.
bam, I'm back in.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I've totally been there. I mean, I've been on longer meditation retreats where I've taken caffeine pills and I've cut them up into different increments,
Oh
and
wow.
I make a tapering schedule for myself. Like, oh, I'm drinking about 300 milligrams a day, so I'll go to 200 milligrams for 2 days, and then I'll go to 150, da 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 da. And it feels very addictive. You know, it feels
Hmm.
like, and the addictive quality for me, the place where that can get, not always, but where it can get unhealthy for me, is when I'm getting really into control, like when I'm really trying to control my internal and external environment. And I really have, especially if it's motivated by a sense of fear, where I feel like if I don't pull all the levers and adjust the dials in exactly the right way, then I'm going to be in trouble or I won't feel the right way. It really is, it can be for me a form of experiential avoidance. But I think,
Mm.
you know, the initial use of the word addiction was not necessarily positive or negative. It acquired this negative connotation over time. But people would say things like, oh, young man, addict yourself to study or addict yourself to
Mm.
prayer. Like there was a notion that you could, another synonym for addiction was devotion. You could devote yourself and with, which is nothing more than a wholesome habit. Like if you devote yourself to that which nourishes you or that which feels like is in line with your higher self, then there's a way that some of your will gets surrendered to that devotion and you're not totally in control of it. But that's a totally wholesome and beneficial way of surrendering your will.
And we see that in recovery for a lot of folks, right? They swap their addiction to every day 6:30 a.m. meetings, right? That they're almost addicted to their AA meeting, or they swap it for work, or they swap it for their religious practice, or whatever it is. I mean, I've certainly done that where I've I've built in all these. I mean, this many years later, I have this whole process around my own recovery that I do every single day. And you could
Uh-huh.
say that's an addiction,
Yeah.
to some degree. Like I wake up and I do this thing to
Yeah.
set up my day. Yeah.
And it's mostly healthy for you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, I
Yeah.
would call that a positive addiction. Why not?
A
Yeah.
positive addiction to meditation, or a positive addiction to, I mean, I have to, but talk about environmental control. Like I put limits on it. Like I even have my own limits on my own exercise. Like I
Mm,
can't run more than this distance. I just have that limit because I
yeah.
know myself. If I start running, I could run forever.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
could just keep going.
Yeah.
Um, so how is that for you?
Well, I think like a lot of people with substance use problems or experience of addiction, I've definitely had the whack-a-mole experience, like where if I
Yeah.
cut back on one escape, like Tara Brach calls them false refuges, like
Yeah.
I lose the false refuge of alcohol. I can't numb out that way anymore. Because for me, it was usually numbing. It's not always numbing, not for
Mm.
everybody, but it was for me. It was very lonely. It was very isolated by the end of it. Um, so if I cut off that escape route, then yeah, there was a period of time where there's a lot of ice cream. There's a period of time where there was a lot of just mindless computer use. Uh, Nowadays, especially in the current climate, it can be a lot of news. And I can
Hmm.
sort of trick myself into thinking, oh, it's good to read a lot of news, but no, it's not good. Not for me. I mean, there's some things that I write about, but reading news for 1 to 2 hours a day is not wholesome. I'm not serving people. It really is more of a often an escape mechanism. Um, I don't know. I've always had a part of me that thinks like I want to be the hyper disciplined, like borderline orthorexic, like Silicon Valley bro, like
Hmm.
the optimizer bro who is doing the cold plunges and the exercise and the this and the that. And I never quite lived up to it. Maybe for better, not for worse.
I don't know
Um,
if anyone's living up to it.
Well,
I
I've seen
can't
people with
imagine.
harmful attachments to health habits, right? And
Right.
there can be, for example, people who here's a very clear example that has come about more recently. People are really into continuous glucose monitors. I don't know if you've seen this,
Oh,
but
yes, yes, yes. Everyone's got those on their arms. I live
and
in
then
Santa
like,
Barbara.
oh, okay,
Everyone's doing everything.
yeah,
Yeah,
totally.
this is not
So
new.
like, like really get it concerned, and like that gives you a very immediate way to like look at a number and think like above this number is bad, below this number is good. So if I need to walk for 2 hours after lunch to get my numbers down, then I'll do it. damn the consequences. And that can be really, I don't know, that can be all consuming. There are people who are really locked in that way. Are they locked in a good way? I think it's probably not serving them. Maybe it is, maybe it's not. I don't know.
Right. I mean, I mean, is this addiction? People could get addicted to, is this purpose, to
Mhm.
meaning, like everything, having everything be purposeful and meaningful? Is that, I mean, that's not an addiction, but that you could turn anything into um, some kind of achievement or tracking intentional use of time.
Mhm.
So you're looking at, are you using your time in a meaningful, purposeful way?
Mhm.
Sounds great.
Mhm.
Sounds fabulous. It also sounds really dangerous to me,
Yeah.
because then all of a sudden, every single minute, we're like, is this meaningful? Is this intentional? Is this, and you could get addicted to that. I mean,
Yes.
I don't know. I mean, we could grab on and cling to anything
Yes.
to try and
That
feel,
that's
yeah,
why I try to be really careful about not putting my own judgment on these behaviors. And just to be very clear, I'm not saying if somebody is devoted to their continuous glucose monitor, that's bad.
yeah,
It's not for me to
yeah,
say that's bad. I think it's an opportunity for reflection and exploration. Like, is this really serving me? And what is it serving? And I think we can ask those same questions about drugs and alcohol. Drugs, including alcohol, because alcohol is a drug.
mm-hmm,
Uh, there's a lot of negative stigma attached to certain drugs. I describe in the book, we have a lot of polluted concepts of what counts as a good drug versus a bad drug. This is
right,
somewhat of a false distinction. It's often really powerfully influenced by industries. There's like a concerted campaign to make sedatives like first generation barbiturates and then later benzodiazepines like Valium and Xanax to make them into like good drugs. Those are good drugs. They're not bad drugs. But then, of course, we have a massive sedative problem. So I think it's really good to uh, be very thoughtful and inquisitive and curious about whether it actually is helpful or unhelpful, to be very pragmatic about it, as opposed to just reverting to some sort of automatic judgment about what is a good addiction versus what is a bad addiction.
right. And those categories can move, right? Because now, I mean, with psychedelics were once bad drugs and now they're good drugs.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
we can swap them depending on what the trend is, or
Right.
where, who's feeding us different kinds of information. So yeah, alcohol. I mean, it feels like alcohol is taking a swing now into a bad drug.
Yes.
Used to be a good drug. Now everyone's like, any amount of alcohol is bad for you.
Hmm.
Um, and any amount of ayahuasca is good for you.
Right.
So
Or cannabis. Cannabis is another one that's really
yeah,
polarized
swings.
right now. But like, yeah, I think psychedelics are really vastly underutilized. It's ridiculous that they're Schedule One controlled substances, which means no legal use whatsoever. I've had patients who have engaged in the research trials for psychedelic assisted psychotherapies and have gotten tremendous benefits. I've been to international conferences where like Geneva is doing a lot of this work right now in Switzerland, and then other countries are doing it legally. Um, and I think if somebody needs to microdose every single day, otherwise they don't feel okay, then that's potentially concerning, and that should be investigated. It's not one size fits all.
Right. Or if you need to do a psychedelic journey to feel connected, and that's how you feel connected to people, and you need to go and do that journey, and you need to go, that again, like one of the things that you talk about in the book is that it's sort of, what are we looking for in the substance use? The urge in some way is it's a it's a message to us about what we yearn for, what we're and that we seek it out through the substance or the behavior or um, the identity that we get addicted to. But there's something under that.
Yeah, yeah, and being open to the range of possibilities. Like you were talking earlier about experiential avoidance versus experiential attachment. Just that, just to open up those two dimensions, I think is very important. Because one of the things I try to do in the book is to chronicle all the different ways people have come into contact with unhealthy relationships with substances and behaviors. Because in that diversity, we can find a lot of wisdom. If we resort to these sort of stereotypical one size fits all versions of why people do a thing, we're leaving people out and we're losing an opportunity to understand. Like there's so many of those simplistic narratives with addiction. People say like, oh, it's just escape. It's somebody who can't handle life. Like that is true sometimes. There are aspects of my use that were very much like that. I couldn't handle being alone with myself at a certain point in my life. I wasn't comfortable in my own skin, so I needed a drink, and I drank a lot while I was alone. When I was watching like Glee on my laptop after a residency shift, but it's not only escape, right? It can also be the more hedonistic pursuit of the romanticized vision of like the happy, fun, connected, sometimes creative. Have a whole chapter on the romantics, going all the way back to like William Wordsworth and 19th century poets. There's so many different threads, and there's so many different purposes to substance use and other addictive behaviors. We really we're doing ourselves a disservice if we don't investigate it.
One of the things that I appreciate about your approach is that you step out of this individualistic lens, because many of us think of addiction, we look at the person, um, and we don't look at the whole system that and it's sort of it's a systemic responsibility. It's a collective responsibility, right? It's not the individual. It's the individual in context, and that the whole expecting the individual to figure it out when, I mean, you're in medical school, that there's a context to that, but there's, context to all sorts of people's lives, people that are experiencing poverty or people that are experiencing, stressors on them that are really, trauma, all sorts of things that contribute to addiction. And that the way out, the path out is more of a collective one. And there isn't really one way out of it because of that
Yeah.
as well.
Yeah. No, thank you for bringing that up. It's really important to me. Because I think, especially in the States, uh, we've had this hyper individualized narrative around addiction. Like
Mm-hmm.
it's a bad thing that certain bad people do. There's this very deep idea. This is one of the different things about the addiction as a disease narrative. We have this idea that certain people are fundamentally sick or broken, maybe constitutionally broken. Maybe they were born that way, or maybe they were somehow injured. But like the problem is in the individual person, and they are defective. And when these defective people come into contact with a bad drug, then they manifest addiction. I think that's really, really dangerous and misguided and dehumanizing. It overlooks the way that the person in connection with the environment then manifests the behavior of addiction. Like we see that even at the level of some of the neurobiology. I'm a big curmudgeon when it comes to dopamine. I think there's so many bad ideas about dopamine, so many like misleading narratives about dopamine. Like even today, people talk about dopamine as if it's like a pleasure pain balance, or dopamine mediates pleasure, and that's not really what it does at all. Um, and there's this one view of dopamine that says, and people are still uncovering this, by the way, like there's still a lot of open questions about the science of dopamine, but like one of the things about dopamine is that it's about predicting the environment and what to expect from the environment with precision. Like not even so much reward prediction error, but like the precision of like, what do I expect when I do X, what happens? And if you look at it that way, you can see how if somebody is living in an unstable environment, a substance or a behavior that has an impact on dopamine systems might be especially sticky, right? Like if somebody is living in chaos, or somebody is having, whether it's like a local traumatic thing in their family, or whether it's a bigger social or political or economic stress, um, that people have a greater susceptibility to this thing that promises more predictability. We definitely see that at the micro, right? Like the substance creates a predictable internal and even external environment. I go to hang out with the same dysfunctional friends, and I feel the same way. And I know I'm feeling this way by 5 drinks. And if I know I have 15 drinks, then the night's going to go a certain kind of way. And looking at it that way really helped me to counteract shame, cause like,
Mm-hmm.
I think like the genesis of shame comes from a lot of these individualistic narratives. Like you did something wrong, you broke your brain, and therefore you have a problem. And,
Right.
if we can widen the aperture a little bit, it's really helpful for dissolving some of that self stigma.
Yeah, I mean, we could think about that as veterans coming back from war that have such high levels of substance use, right? That there's the unpredictability of that experience, that um, students going away to school for the first time and they're in that transition period, and you see all, the binge drinking that happens. Um, Times when people are going through a divorce, the unpredictability of that, babies being born. I mean, all these are all contexts where, if you have a history of substance use or a history of addiction, that's like sort of the risk factors, right? But it's not you as an individual that's the problem. And so dopamine would play a role in that, of being able to predict with precision. I mean, I think of it as also the learning
Mm-hmm.
neurohormone, that it helps with our learning, right? We're trying to learn something. Um, Rat Park. That's what I think you should name your book. Although I do can't put it down. Rat Park is the name of your Substack,
That's right.
and I like Rat Park because when I learned about that study, Rat Park, it describes so well for me how I work with clients, and what I'm kind of trying to do for clients, and maybe even for my own self. It's like, I want you to live in Rat Park. How do we make Rat Park? I want to live in Rat Park. How do I make Rat Park where the desire to escape and the desire to hold on too tight become so immersed in something so much bigger, that even though those are there, you still kind of want to escape. You still want to hold on tight. There's something bigger that you are going to choose, which is Rat Park. So tell us a little bit about Rat Park, what it is, and
Yeah, sure thing.
yeah.
Yeah, there was this idea a while ago, say before the 1970s, where you could study addiction through animal models by essentially getting rats addicted to morphine in a cage. And then there was this one guy, Bruce Alexander, brilliant theorist and psychologist at the University of British Columbia, who said, well, hold on a second. This is not a good rat life. This is not how rats usually live, in a tiny little cage. So he created Rat Park, and he created it with the purpose of studying the process of addiction or dependence or compulsive use or frequent use of drugs like morphine. And so he built this thing called Rat Park, which is basically a huge enclosure, big plywood walls. He even went in and like hand painted spruce trees on it because they're in the Pacific Northwest. Uh, the rats had opportunities to play. They had opportunities to mate, and then under those better conditions, under the enriched environment conditions, he then ran the experiment. Like, can we get these rats addicted to morphine? And there's a really big and interesting scientific story here. There have been replication attempts. There are little wrinkles that I describe a little more in like the main Rat Park post I made about this on my Substack. But suffice to say, uh, Bruce Alexander found, and subsequent studies have like pretty reasonably replicated the notion that like if you enrich the environment, it's way harder to addict a rat to morphine. You just
Right.
couldn't get them hooked the same way that they were in those crappy little cages. And yeah, it shows exactly what you were describing, is that people engage in this thing. In the behavioral literature, they call it niche creation. Like we're really lucky as human beings that we get to do so much to create our little niches. We get to like make our home cozy, and we can set up our work the right way. And like niche creation can also be, do you take a minute at the beginning of a clinical session or a podcast interview to think about and connect with, like, why am I really here, and what is this in service of? We have that capacity. We don't always exercise that capacity, and it also doesn't have to be a purely individual effort. We can enlist others to help us in our own efforts at niche creation. And in fact, when we try to do it all by ourselves, it often runs us into trouble, because I was trying to do a version of that when I was in the worst of my addiction. I was writing in my journal. I was like coming up with a behavioral plan, posted a little calendar on my wall, and was checking off boxes like, did I do hot yoga today? Did I meditate today? Did I track my drinks today, etc. And it really didn't work for me. It really, really didn't work. And what I found in the process of recovery is I just needed more of like the socially situated part of all that. I just needed more people. I needed to give up more. I needed to take more direction. Um, and that's the part of the whole niche creation rat park thing that really stuck with me. Every time I've tried to run it by myself, it hasn't worked.
Yeah. People can get addicted to hot yoga too. I've had. So yeah, I mean, I remember in the beginning, I mean, I had this great, I did like a 12-step thing for a while, but I had this great sponsor, Anna, and we had this sort of agreement that if I was going to drive to the store um, to get binge food, because I used to go like I'd drive to the store, I'd get binge food, and I was so like addicted to whatever it was, donuts or bagels or, you know, anything that could get me quick. I'd like put my earphones in and I'd go around the store and I would actually eat it. Like, I mean, I'd pay for it, but I would eat it like in the store while I'm
Yeah.
shopping. Like couldn't wait to like buy it. I mean, at least with alcohol, you probably can't open the beer in the store and walk around, but I could, probably you could open it and like, you know, you get to the car, as soon as you get to the car, you're opening it. And so we had this agreement that I would call her if I'm driving to the store and that she would, at least I'd talk to her while I'm going through the store.
Mm.
And usually that in itself, like that's the social connection, that if you're there was something that dissolved it, in the connection. There's something about someone else witnessing you in that space, letting someone in when you're in that space. And then usually you end up crying and, you know, all the emotions come. And then you get to the source of really why what is it that's underneath all this that you're escaping from? And maybe that's not, I don't know. I guess that's rat park where like rats need other rats. Like
Mm.
rats are very into other rats. We need to figure that out for ourselves, and everybody's different, you
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
of what their
Yeah. I
version
mean,
is.
you could read a book about how to apply psychotherapeutic principles to your own use or addictive patterns, right? Like there are a lot of people who have written very useful works about bringing curiosity to the patterns of your urges and habits and cravings. And I think that's really useful. That's a key process in some of the psychotherapies related to substance use disorders and other addictive behaviors.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but in the moment of truth, it's hard to do. It's really, really hard to do precisely because it's painful. You know, this is a classic instruction is like in the moment, if nothing else, it's a huge win to ask yourself, what do I get from this? What do I get from this? And then sometimes you see the pattern that leads to pain and that leads to disillusionment and disenchantment. And that becomes the engine for change. Uh, but it really hurts. So I've often need support in that, you know, just to do it by yourself is sometimes too heavy of a load.
So where are you at now with your substance use? I
Yeah,
don't
I'm
know. Does it
totally
does it really?
abstinent.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm totally abstinent from alcohol and other mind or mood altering drugs, which is like the usual verbiage people use in
Yeah.
12 steps. But then again, that's also not true, right? Like it admits of many possibilities because I drink a lot of caffeine. I don't think I
Mm-hmm.
drink an unhealthy amount of caffeine.
What's
I
a
mean,
lot? Give
yeah,
us.
like 3 cups a day.
Okay. Okay.
I try to stick to 3 cups a day. Usually I don't even get to three, but
Mm-hmm.
I think of three because of, and by the way, this is the same sort of thing you do in, uh, substance use treatment. Like somebody comes in and they're like, oh, I have 3 glasses of wine a day. And it's like, okay, well, you know, do you know the ounces? Do you know the fluid
Yeah.
ounces there? Because they're different cups,
Exactly.
right? So,
Three
um,
venti lattes from Starbucks.
exactly. Exactly. So yeah, I mean, like, just like we were talking about before, like caffeine is mind and mood altering. Sometimes if I'm jet lagged, I'll take a Benadryl. That's notable because I was not allowed to take a Benadryl when I
Mm-hmm.
was under this monitoring contract. I would need a prescription just to get Benadryl, because they had documented cases of people taking like 50 tabs of Benadryl a day to try to get high. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
so there are fuzzy boundaries, but like a lot of people also with behavioral problems or people who identify as having behavioral addictions, they define the sort of hardline behaviors that are definite no's. For me,
Right.
that's like alcohol, stimulants, etc. Um, and then I see my addictive qualities in everything else, just everything else, work, escapism. My son got a video game console in December. I used to play a lot of video games. There's a little of that in the urge.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, I had a brief moment in January when I was playing a lot, like a lot. Like I played. The funny thing about the Nintendo Switch is it tracks your playtime hours. So for
Yeah.
the over the course of the month, I played 40 hours of games. Like
Mm-hmm.
40 hours is a lot. Like, is that an addiction? I don't know. Like, kind of yes, kind of no. Like, it crowded out some other kind of leisure time hobbies, but it was also really fun and nostalgic, and it was a thing I shared with my son. So like,
Mm-hmm.
it's addictive, but it's not a full blown addiction. I think it would be kind of perverse for me to go to like a internet gaming anonymous meeting or to seek out treatment for
They'd kick
that.
you out.
They would kick me. They'd be like, "Come on, man,
Yeah.
get real." But I see it. You know, I see it in those tendencies, and I have a lot more peace with it. You know, I don't see my life task as like becoming the perfectly disciplined neoliberal human subject who is always executing perfectly. I try to have some good humor and acceptance about it, and to pick my poison. Um, my cholesterol is kind of hovering a little bit on the edge of high. Uh, so I watch emotional eating when it comes to ice cream and high
Mm-hmm.
fat stuff. Is it an addiction that's killing me? Like, kind of yes, kind of no. If I die from a heart attack, then maybe my family will hear this and think otherwise. But it's not raging. By the same token, it would be perverse for me to go into an Overeaters Anonymous meeting.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I notice those sort of processes and those tendencies coming out, and I don't think there's a big distinction between that kind of diminished control and the kind of diminished control I experience. And the worst of my addiction, it's a difference of degree and not kind. It's not like a substantially different essence, like a
Mm-hmm.
different thing. It's not a different thing. It's just a different degree.
Mm-hmm. I think if there's one process that stands out for me as people are in recovery, it's the process of self, and that capacity, as you're talking, of to observe yourself and to observe your own slippery slopes, and have compassion for yourself as you are on one of those slippery slopes, and sort of like, okay, I'm noticing this tendency. I mean, I'm the same way. I can slip on any slope. So
Yeah.
I'm noticing this tendency, and with kindness, can I gently redirect, or can I figure out what's going on here, or what I'm really craving? Like, what is it really that I am craving? And maybe niche my rat park a little better. So
Yeah. And
I can
have
be with my
kindness for the
son without
harsh.
video games. Yeah.
Yeah. And I have kindness for the harsh disciplinarian that
Yeah.
says you're doing it wrong.
Right.
Like, I need attention to both sides of that dynamic. Like, watch out for the slippery slope, watch out for the harsh disciplinarian. It's really, I mean,
Right.
it's like acceptance and change.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you, Carl Fisher. I loved The Urge. It's a really fun read. It's a weaving of history, which I'm not usually into the historical stuff, but the way that you write about the historic, it's super interesting to hear about the history of addiction, everything from back to like Vedic texts to, Greeks to, all over, the history of addiction, your personal story, and then this much more integrative, creative perspective on addiction and recovery. And I kind of see it also as, I could imagine you writing it, working out a few things for yourself, as we do as authors. We work out our own stuff. And then you continue to write on Substack. And I imagine that we're going to get a preview to Can't Put It Down as you write on Substack. So people are the best writers when they are writing a book. So go subscribe to Rat Park, which is your
Mm-hmm.
Substack um, platform, which is a really fun platform as well. And then, you have a podcast as well.
Yeah, that's right. And that one, it's also published to the Rat Park Substack, but it's called Flourishing After Addiction. If you're on your phone right now listening to this and you want to just pull it up on your podcast thing, that's how it shows up. Flourishing After
Flourishing
Addiction
After
with Carl
Addiction.
Eric Fisher.
Yeah, yeah, which is great. And I'm going to be on that one coming up too. So you can listen to Carl interview me in Flourishing
Yeah,
After
that
Addiction.
was great.
And yeah.
I'm honored, Diana. Thank you so much for the kind words. It means a lot to hear especially from a non-history fan, that they found it interesting and useful, because that's what I was going for. Like it's kind of like an easy sell to all the history buffs, all of like the middle-aged dads like myself, but like to make it translatable to like people who have real questions or are interested in the psychology of it all. That means a lot. So thank you for saying
Yeah.
that.
Well, I'm interested in urges. I find the whole concept of urges fascinating.
Yeah.
We might have to have a follow up because I love the idea of an urge and being able to ride an urge, and when do we give in to an urge, and that urges aren't all bad.
Yeah.
So I think you address that beautifully in the book as well.
Thank you.
So thank you. All
Yeah.
right.
This has been great, Diana. Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Wise Effort podcast. Wise Effort is about you taking your energy and putting it in the places that matter most to you. And when you do so, you'll get to savor the good of your life along the way. If you would like to become a member of the Wise Effort podcast, go to wiseeffort.com. And if you like this episode and think it would be helpful to somebody, please leave a review over at Podchaser. I would like to thank my team, my partner in all things, including the producer of this podcast, Craig, Ashley Hyatt, the podcast manager, and thank you to Ben Gold at Bell and Branch for our music. This podcast is for informational and entertainment purposes only, and it's not meant to be a substitute for mental health treatments.